Welcome to Unexpected Points. I am your host, Kevin Cole. I am joined today by Arif Hasan of The Athletic Minnesota, Vikings beat writer. We're going to get into everything Vikings. You can follow him on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL, which I learned the first time that we recorded this. I forgot to record there. So we'll spare you the NFL at the end of Twitter handle conversation that we had earlier. But so we're going to get into everything going on with the Vikings. They obviously lost to the Bucs. That really impacts their playoff chances. We still have about a 15% chance of making the playoffs, so we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to discuss it maybe a little prematurely, like a post-mortem, and decide what are we doing with this franchise going forward. But before we get into that, I want to talk about a few issues around the NFL. First off, Monday Night Football, Browns-Ravens, a huge game for the Ravens and their playoff chances, but I also think it changes some of the topic around the league about not just by the numbers, what their chances to get in, but I think the way Lamar Jackson played, the way he was able to run, whether they have a real a title shot and title contention there. So maybe I'll just shoot it over to you first, Arif, on this. How do you think about the Ravens pre and post Monday night? Or is there a big change beyond the fact that obviously this helps their playoff chances?
Yeah, I think so. I think, most people regard the Browns right now as a good team. I think that's pretty fair. I mean, the record overstates, their team quality, but I think for the most part, a win against the Browns is an indication that you've got the ability to win against some pretty good teams. And it's not just that. I think that the way that Lamar Jackson played, I think kind of demonstrates some of the things that you can rely on that give him kind of a floor. And so that I think is pretty important for the playoffs. But I think more than anything else, I mean, the Ravens have consistently demonstrated that they're a high variance team in a very good way, which is great for the playoffs, as the Ravens have demonstrated in the past. And I think that, kind of their blitz heavy approach with a lot of man corners that create a lot of turnovers. I mean, that stuff on defense, it has produced, good defensive numbers. But more interesting to me is that it creates more possessions on offense. I mean, they weren't able to turn those fumbles into offensive possessions in this game. And it turns out they almost needed to, but they didn't. But going forward in the future, I think it's kind of difficult to imagine that they won't be able to turn some of those into turnovers. And then, I think that just generally speaking, the way that they were able to generate multiple scores in situations when they needed those scores, is another indication that they've got playoff potential. So if there is something if playoff football is different in some way, I think the Ravens have whatever it takes that is different than regular season play.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Ravens were one of my bigger misses coming into the year because I was thinking they could really be there with the Chiefs. Maybe they were being undervalued a little bit going into the season because of the defense, because of the fact that Lamar, while his stats were probably going to regress because you just can't keep touchdown rate and those sort of things. I thought maybe the baseline for what that regression would be had gone up, and that he could be a better passer this season. Now, I think I heard some this is like TMZ here, but I heard some minor rumors that he had some physical problems like with the knee earlier this season, and I'm wondering if that has cleared up a little bit now that he's had some time off and some other things that are going on, because I think he looks different to me physically.
He does.
I feel like. I mean, he was running earlier at almost the same level as far as the number of rushes, but we didn't see the explosive plays much. We saw it a little bit, but then we saw it in the Eagles game where he took one in on a fourth down all the way, although it was pretty much straight line run. But this is probably the first time that I've really seen him just running around all over the place, where he looked literally impossible to tackle. It didn't really matter what the defense was doing. So I think physically he may be back to where he was before. Now, my concern, though, is that the passing game was still pretty, I don't know. It was clunky. It was not working. I mean, it was working in a sense that they put up good numbers. If you look at the completion percentage, it ended up actually being pretty good after not being good earlier in the game. But what I was looking at specifically was the fact that he was either scrambling or was sacked on about a third of his dropback. So that's just a huge amount. So if you're not even attempting a pass, presumably it's because either they're not open or he wasn't reading it correctly on a third of your dropbacks. I mean, that's just not going to work. Last year, he was scrambling on about 10% of his dropbacks. He was taking a sack on less than 5% of his dropbacks. So it's pretty low numbers. That's a huge increase over there. Did you see that? Does that concern you at all, whether or not the passing game is really working, other than the fact that they got a few chunk plays on some broken plays?
Yeah, I think that is a concern, and I like how you phrase it. It's the passing game, I think, is more the concern than like Lamar Jackson specifically. I think
Right.
that his talent as a passer hasn't changed much. I would have actually liked to have seen it improve, but for the most part, I don't think it's changed much. But I think that there's two elements at play here. The first is that the Ravens just don't have a very good receiving core, and that plays a part in it. Whether or not they get open, whether or not he's got the ability to kind of find those open guys, etc.
Whether they catch the ball in the case of
Yeah,
Marquise
and catch the ball. Yeah.
Yeah.
It would have actually been a less exciting game if they had caught the ball a little bit more consistently. But the second part is, and I say this with a bit of irony, I think the Greg Roman offense has been solved, but not in the way that people typically talk about it with running quarterbacks. I think the passing game is relatively simple, and I probably wouldn't come to this conclusion on my own. I think that based off of the film people that I respect that talk about this sort of stuff, people like, Seth Glean at PFF, the people like Smart Football, whose name Chris Brown at Smart Football. Yeah. And a couple of other people, Derek Clausen of Football Outsiders, they've talked about how the Greg Roman passing offense, Justice Mosqueda, freelancer, they've talked a lot about how this passing offense is just not that interesting, not that complex, and not that aggressive or modern. And I think Chris Brown remarked that it hasn't really changed in the last 20 years. And so from a play design perspective, that might be an issue too. Now, if Lamar Jackson is physically in a better spot than he was before, and it does seem like that. I think the Philly game doesn't provide us with the best evidence of it, but I think that this game does because he was cutting, right. and that was pretty important. That's kind
when
of
he wasn't sliding, when he wasn't slipping and sliding, he was
exactly.
He was cutting too well, maybe. The grass couldn't even maintain his cuts.
Yeah. I think that with all of that and his base being there, I think that, for the most part, when he was throwing the ball, it was accurate. That's fine. But if, the reads aren't there, if the timing isn't there, and mind you, he's had some injuries on the offensive line that he's had to deal with as well, that shortens the amount of time he has to read the field. That I think all of that, plays a role in whether or not that passing game, kind of has it. Again, the Ravens are one of the few teams that you can kind of trust to be efficient running the ball, so long as they kind of maintain the successful run designs that they had last year. And it seems like that's, still on the table. So again, there's a floor that other teams just don't have offensively, but I think if you're not going to be able to pass the ball, you're not going to be able to win. And so it's just kind of whatever that bar is for most teams, it's a little bit lower for the Ravens. And so they're going to need to figure out something. And I don't know if that's something that can be figured out in this late into a season right before the playoffs. But for them, I think the potential is there. Again, they're a high variance team that has a lot of big play opportunities that they just need to be able to convert.
Yeah. So they weren't converting early on those. They did convert later on those. I mean, he missed Mark Andrews on a pass that was on him at one point in the game, but he also hit Hollywood. I'll put quotes around that now because it seems a bit stripped from his name there. Hollywood Brown on the 4th and 6 was a pretty gutsy throw for the fact that he looked like he pretty easily could have run for it at that point. Now, you actually brought something up that I want to glance into your perspective on this, because I really trust your perspective on a lot of these different issues, and I probably come at things from a little bit too much of the numbers tell us X, coaching doesn't matter, all this sort of stuff. But when it comes to coaching, something that's been on my radar, and especially about Greg Roman, is the fact that he's getting a lot of criticism this season. Now, if I remember correctly, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe it was the wrong people saying this last season. There was talk of, hey, this guy should be a head coach somewhere because his scheme is so good, which I thought was a little bit weird because it's like, it's pretty
that doesn't matter
to a quarterback, right? Yeah, it's pretty specific quarterback. So I wonder just generally, while I think the people you mentioned who were saying these things about the scheme, like, they're very smart, I trust their opinion, but I'm always trying to figure out where is the truth, or where is the certainty, and where's the murkiness in performance versus coaching? Because often, even in the course of a season, you'll say week one, the Browns, they get killed by the Ravens. They don't play well. People say, you know what, Stefanski didn't do a good job scheming up. And then the next couple weeks later, they kill someone. They say, hey, Stefanski did a great job. It's like, well, is it really, like, is he bad one week and then not bad the next week? Or are we just building that into to what's going on? Are we putting too much on the coach because we see the players as more fixed talents, and the coaches as what's maneuvering everything around it, where that's not necessarily the case?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of areas that we can kind of draw signal from. I think the first, I think, is that Greg Roman is despite the successes he's had, and I think Colin Kaepernick is the other big success that people can point to. He does not seem like in situations where he's available as an offensive coordinator, he does not seem like a particularly coveted offensive
Right.
coordinator. So the coaching community does not seem to value him as much as they would, someone that we might call a bad offensive coordinator like Norv Turner, right?
Hmm.
And some of that is relationships, some of that is history, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. But Greg Roman's been in the NFL for a long time. He's developed a lot of relationships, and he does not seem like a particularly coveted offensive coordinator. So that might mean something to us. The fact that he's not a coveted head coach, that's not an important signal to me, because that's like ownership and search firms and buzz. And so like I would not have guessed that, for example, Zach Taylor was a coveted head coach.
Yeah, I was
right?
just about to say
Yeah.
proximity to Sean McVay. Yeah, all
Right.
those
Yeah,
things.
exactly. And so, that's a less important signal, but I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is, if we're asking a question about whether or not it is related to player talent or whether or not it's related to, coach design, and you've got a coach with this kind of history, when else has Greg Roman been successful? Well, he's had an extraordinary running talent in Colin Kaepernick, which worked like once, right?
Hmm.
1.5 years maybe. But hadn't kind of worked out since then. He didn't do what were we using Buffalo with Tyrod Taylor, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that was not a remarkable offense. Not that Taylor is like this like quarterback that got jobbed out of an opportunity with the Chargers or anything like that. But like
Well, it was like a high floor, I would say, like
yeah, I would say
highish
he's a high
floor.
floor. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think that his game is all that different from Alex Smith, except that he holds onto the ball quite a bit longer.
yeah,
And you can work with that, and you can turn in some pretty decent offenses. But I think that's the point, right? Is that Roman has not done a great job with what we'd regard as average talent. He has done a very good job with some specific talents. Like I think, for example, Joe Flacco has looked a little bit better with the Jets than he did in his final year with Greg Roman, right?
yeah.
Maybe, but like I think that's an indication to me, right? Like the Jets are, I think, universally agreed upon to have a really bad offense for whatever reason. And Flacco turned in, some pretty good stretches of play relative to what we expected Flacco to be based off his time in Denver and his final year in Baltimore. And again, that was with Greg Roman. So whenever he's had average or subpar talent, it hasn't really turned into a ton. So if his only offenses that have been good have taken advantage of unique talents that, in fairness to him, might not have been taken, fully exploited in other systems, then it doesn't really seem like he's this remarkable offensive mind, but rather a unique offensively minded talent that can take advantage of a particular type of offensive opportunity, but not some others, right? Like Shanahan has produced some really good offenses and sometimes with mediocre talent. And when he gets great talent, like Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, etc., you've got an MVP season. When he's got okay talent, and I don't know what you'd call Robert Griffin before injury, but there's something there. When he's had he was with the Browns. I mean, there were some opportunities there where you saw, hey, this guy's pretty good.
Yeah.
And some of the guys that I respect from a film perspective were able to identify this before his offenses exploded in Atlanta. I think in 2015, for example, Charles McDonald wrote a piece for the Falcoholic that essentially called Kyle Shanahan one of the best offensive play callers in the NFL. And at the time, the 2015 Falcons were just not that interesting of an offense. And lo and behold, 2016, you go to the Super Bowl. So I think that there's some signal from people that have a pretty good track record from outside of the coaching community, people like McDonald and Mosqueda and Chris Brown and so on, and then also some signal within coaching circles between how coveted an offensive mind might be. We know McVay is a great offensive mind because his assistants keep getting hired, right?
Yeah.
Or people who have like had a cup of coffee with him have gotten hired, right?
Right.
And we know Andy Reid is kind of the same thing. That's not really the case, I think, with Greg Roman. So there's
All
a couple
right.
of areas
I think
where
we can
draw
render.
signal.
I think we can render a verdict on Greg Roman. Let's just go ahead. I think I'm ready. Stamp.
Bad.
No good.
Great.
Okay. Bad. Worse than Shanahan, which is kind of like everybody, right?
Yeah.
We'll just say that now. Okay. Now on the other side, tell me if because I'm biased on the other side of the field, which is what Kevin Stefanski is doing, who you are aware of. I was about to say intimately, but that's not right. But you're very aware of
familiar
Kevin
with, how about that?
yeah, familiar with Stefanski from his time in Minnesota. I mean, I had this, of course, I was largely operating on faith when the hire came in the first place because I said, this is the guy they wanted last year. This is the guy they want this year. I trust, DePodesta and his brain trust there versus, the football guy world for this sort of guy. So there's something that I thought was interesting about him is that, okay, he's doing the play calling. So he seems to be doing a good job, or people are saying he's doing a good job there. But I think there's also this other aspect, and I think this is the hard part to get at, this like, how are you as a manager? And I actually honestly felt more comfortable in that sort of realm because that's what people would point to, is to say that he's, the organization, being even keeled, being, they say, I'm trying to think of what it was, like being real, whatever that means, like kind of being yourself as opposed to maybe screaming at someone or trying to or doing something just for a show sort of thing. So he had all of those traits. What do you think about Stefanski so far? Because the reason that I'm going to say that I don't think I think the Browns are a year away, but I'm more confident on the Browns timeline for next year and the year after that because of Stefanski and what he's done there. I feel like it's like a floor raising sort of situation, even if Baker Mayfield isn't has a lower floor for a quarterback.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of interesting to me, obviously, is that the Browns are winning despite a negative point differential, and that feels weird. That reminds me of Sean McDermott and the Bills having a negative point differential heading into the playoffs, and now a lot of people consider Sean McDermott to be a good coach. I don't think there's a ton there, but it's nice to kind of remember that example to kind of say negative point differential doesn't mean you're a bad coach necessarily, at least. I would say that
other than Adam Gase, who I believe had a negative point differential when he was in Miami and they were making the playoffs. But anyway, we'll ignore that.
Sure. So certainly there's an open book opportunity there. But one thing that I'm kind of reminded of, Adam Harstad, who not a ton of people follow, but I think the people who follow him think that he's a pretty smart mind. He pointed out that the thing with evaluating coaches is that we have the most signal to the stuff that might matter the least. Things like clock management and whether or not play calling looks interesting, right? And the stuff that you're talking about, being a good manager, is stuff that translates into wins, of course, but is very difficult to evaluate. Like I maybe it was easy to identify Bill Belichick as a good coach because the Patriots were such underdogs early on in his career, and they were able to turn in some wins. But a lot of good coaches, it might be kind of difficult to identify based off of kind of the resume or their history. I mean, we've had special teams coaches win the Super Bowl twice now, as head coaches, and I don't know what the signal could have been there. So I think that from an interpersonal perspective, I've had a couple of conversations with Stefanski, both before he became an offensive coordinator and after. And certainly I think his experiences have changed him. I think before he became an offensive coordinator and he was a position coach, he was actually a lot easier to talk to. And the genuineness that you're talking about was instantly identifiable. As soon as he became an OC and then obviously a head coach candidate, he clammed up a lot. Which I guess makes sense. There's kind of more of a microscope, but that awareness is probably a good thing. As a head coach, I would probably say that there's a lot there, and I think one thing that points to that is how he was able to assemble such a great staff around. Like getting Bill Callahan as an offensive line coach, what a remarkable get, and we've seen that translate into gains right away. We've seen Joel Bitonio return to form. We've seen 2 offensive line acquisitions turn really remarkable. It seems like they've scouted Jedrick Wills pretty well as well. So there's a lot there to say that his ability to find and hire talent along the offensive coaching staff is something to be kind of proud of. You don't have to just make sure that you hire Greg Williams and say the defense is solved, right? Like you've got some real coaching talent. So there's that. I think that the play design aspect of it, it's easy to get caught up in like the Jarvis Landry passes and stuff like that. But I think, for the most part, he's following play calling tendencies that we would argue are translating to effective football, high play action rates, motion at the snap, so on, while still, finding ways to maximize the particular talents that he has. Again, that remarkable offensive line. They've committed to a run heavy attack in a way that does not seem as inefficient as you would think.
It seems lighter in a way, though, than Minnesota. And I'm not sure if even by the numbers that's the case, but it seems,
I agree with you.
It seems lighter. But maybe that's because
they're ahead a lot, right? We're in Minnesota,
I think that helps. I think that helps. But maybe it's also whatever you think of Kirk Cousins. Maybe if you think of Cousins, Diggs, Thielen, it seems more attractive to pass in a way, in a way than what than what the Browns have. And I don't know. It's just weird because this is again, you can't really credit Stefanski with this. Maybe you can credit Callahan and other things, but they get some really explosive runs out of the
Oh, yeah.
out of. I mean, and I don't know if it's Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, the fact that they're two of the most difficult running backs to tackle on the planet, and if it comes to that. But I'm just always surprised by how often, maybe like I said, this is anecdotal, so I haven't tracked it. How often, Nick Chubb is scoring where they're not even inside the 5-yard line. Sometimes they're 7 yards out or they're 15 yards out. It's just kind of some easy ways of getting scores. And then one thing I want to mention about Callahan, which I think maybe this is, again, I'm fanboying a little bit too much here and revealing my Stefanski fandom here, but there was he was mic'd up for the Bengals game. There's this interesting thing on the sideline where they ran it, they got it very close to the goal line. And then he went over to Callahan. He said, "Hey, what do you think we should do? Like, what do you think we should do here?" And he's like, "I think we should just run that same, run it again." He's like, "Oh, just do it again." He's like, "Okay, sounds good." And then he just calls into Baker and he's like, I forget what he says, Xerox or something, which is just run the same play again. And then they score a touchdown. Right. And he comes over there, congratulates him. It's like little things like that I feel like can really build something. I mean, how often is the offensive line coach basically calling a critical play at the end, or the head coach allowing him to do that in that sort of way?
Yeah, I think a collaborative atmosphere is a sign of a good head coach. I think, for example, some of the worst head coaches the Vikings have had, like Brad Childress, for example, really well known for not developing a collaborative atmosphere either between the players or between the coaches and the head coach. Whereas some of the better coaches that you find seem to generate, that collaborative atmosphere. It's a reputation that Andy Reid has had. I guess Doug Peterson's no longer a good head coach, but while people were talking about how good a head coach he was, that was something that he had. It's something McVay's a little bit famous for. And so, yeah, I think that that's another sign of a good coach. These are all qualities that seem necessary, but not sufficient. It's very difficult to identify all the qualities that make a good head coach, but to the extent that we've got, some signs that someone's a good head coach, I think Stefanski is most of them.
Okay. And what about the Browns? Because there is some talk, I think it's crazy. I mean, I think it's a little bit crazy talk about the Browns being maybe a force in the playoffs this year. I mean, it's kind of like more of a first take-ish sort of
Sure.
sort of thing that I've seen out there. I mean, I feel like they're like I said, a year away, but there is like a baseline that if anyone gets into the playoffs, they have a chance of winning. I mean, Eli Manning happened twice, right?
Right.
Of course, he had the defense.
Yeah,
exactly. yeah. Both of those guys had probably a little bit better defensively. Do you think this Browns team could compete? Maybe not this year, but could compete next year. Like, well, that would be my thing for them. Like, is this really a team that? Or is there some caution? Should you throw some caution? And wait, actually, you know what? More specifically, I want to focus on Baker a little bit here because they're going to have to figure out they're going to pick up his 5th-year option if they're going to extend him. So that's also like a strategic thing when you're looking to next year and the following year is do you lock yourself into Baker Mayfield after what we've seen this season?
Sure. I think way to frame this. How did you feel about the Titans heading into this year?
I felt okay. I felt better about Tannehill than some other people, at least. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think that this is too dissimilar from that. Okay. Run heavy attack with a surprisingly efficient quarterback that not a ton of people believed in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty good play calling and, maybe a stronger defense than what the Browns have, but very, very similar offensive, like essentially, similar offensive language and terminology and tendencies. So I think that serves as a pretty decent comparison. And obviously the Titans, did I think a little bit more in the playoffs than a lot of people thought. So those are all kind of pretty good points to look at. And I would say, yeah, I think especially the injuries that the Browns have had on defense, that they haven't had an opportunity to play Del Pete or Greedy Williams this year. I think that, talent in the secondary is I guess the most important talent to have. I think that they're likely to improve on defense, which is great, which is good because I think that there is a lot of opportunity for regression on offense. And either because of play design or because, it's a run heavy attack or, Baker doesn't get, the open looks that he's had kind of in this stretch of the season. And so I think that there's a pretty decent chance that the Browns become a little bit more solidified. I mean, it might be a situation where they're a better team and their record gets worse again, because, we've just been talking about how the record is a little bit kind of off based off of their talent. But I think as for Baker, I mean, that one's tough. I mean, the 5th-year option gives you kind of a unique opportunity to not commit, but It's kind of unusual to give a quarterback a fifth-year option, but not an extension. So
Yeah. I mean,
I don't.
plus it's different now, right? So the fifth-year option is fully guaranteed now. So
Yeah, yeah,
there's no like takebacks
right.
like there
You
were
can't play
like
with it.
there like there were in the past. And it's he's the number one pick too. So it's going to be, I don't know
Yeah,
what it is, a $20 million option or something. It's not going to be cheap.
well, it's going to be more because it's the franchise value for quarterbacks. So
Oh, is it? Okay. Yeah.
yeah, the
Okay.
top 10 picks for the fifth-year option are franchise value.
Okay.
I mean, which is just nuts, but that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
I think that they would take the fifth-year option. Obviously, you commit yourself to essentially 2 years if you do that, the fourth year and the fifth year. But I think that gives you enough data to make a decision. And I think that that's what they do, and then they can replace the fifth-year option with a long-term deal if that fourth year works out really well. I think Baker's kind of the perfect quarterback to work with this offense in a lot of ways, just so you can kind of test a lot of the things that you want to do offensively with him. So, yeah. I mean, I would be an open book on him. The second half of his rookie year was pretty remarkable. I don't think he's hit that yet, but the offense has turned in some pretty efficient passing games, even with Odell Beckham out. So, I think he's certainly worth optioning at least.
Yeah, he seems to be a good fit. I was questioning the fit a little bit when he was struggling, but there were some weather issues. There were some other things that were going on. The one problem, like the interception that he had, where it was kind of like a simulated pressure, and then I forget who it was. It was one of the linebackers ended up dropping out, and then intercepting him. I specifically, I mean, it was a nice interception. It wasn't like an easy one, but I specifically listened to his press conference after that game because I wanted to hear. There was a little bit of confusion as did he see him and think he could squeeze it by, or did he not see him? And it sounded like from his answer that he didn't see it, or he didn't see it enough. That concerns me because that seems to be happening a lot, and those are the types of plays where I don't know how you correct that. Like, I feel like that's something when you're in your third year in the league, I don't know if you can really coach that out of someone. You could probably coach out of someone, don't throw that. If you can't throw that, even if you see it. But if you don't see it, I don't know. What do you think there? But I'm just speculating on something like that because that's my concern with Baker is that maybe he still has the potential to throw you out of a game that you've done everything right as a coach and as a play caller and everything else.
So I guess I'd have to figure out how often that happens because Cousins threw a pick like that against Atlanta where he just did not see the linebacker at all. And he is not a particularly turnover-prone quarterback. He's maybe one of the most coachable quarterbacks in the NFL, I think, to a fault. Yeah. And so, some quarterbacks can be very coachable, very good, and you can kind of move them forward, schematically, and they'll still make that mistake from time to time. So
I guess I'm only thinking of it because he did the same thing. Maybe it was the first or second play of the season against Baltimore, where they had Calais Campbell drop out, and he tipped the ball that ended up getting caught. So maybe that's just on my radar because of that.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe Baker's just uniquely bad at replacement blitzes. I don't know, but that would be interesting.
Yeah. And then Minka Fitzpatrick got that pick six, where that's a different thing. That was a guy you didn't see coming forward. But anyway, go ahead.
I mean, I think that's what you get to rely on Stefanski's chops as a quarterback coach who has had to deal with much worse quarterbacks than Baker. I mean, he was the quarterback coach for Christian Ponder. Which
Christian Ponder slander.
I can't imagine. But yeah, I think that that's something that you might be able to rep out for somebody as young as Baker. I mean, youngish. I mean, he spent a lot of time in college, so third year is not quite the same for him as it is for others. But yeah, I mean that's something that I'm comfortable optioning and seeing if your fourth year as a quarterback you can fix that with a coach that has basically touched every position on offense except the offensive line and seems to generate really good interpersonal relationships and seems to be a really good teacher. So, I wouldn't say that that's something that is not, teachable, but that I think just kind of really depends on how often this has happened. If this is a consistent issue, I think it's baked in the cake. I guess, pun intended. But for the most part, these things will happen to talented quarterbacks as well.
Yeah. That's interesting. Actually, we'll talk about some of the turnover stuff when we talk about the Vikings later, because there's been kind of a flip there, and Yeah, so it'll be interesting with the Browns because they have some defensive talent that'll hopefully get healthy. They have a decent amount of cap space for a team that's done as well as they have, and I think next year will be it'll be an interesting strategic year, especially if the cap stays low, because then you're going to find out maybe some teams with cap space will try to press their advantage in that sort of year while others are cutting, right? And there'll be a potential for a lot of veteran talent, kind of mid-level veteran talent on the market. Okay, let's hit Wentz and Hurts really quickly. I mean, I talked about this some last week. Everyone's been talking about it everywhere. Are you officially right about Carson Wentz at this point? For those who don't know, Arif is a well-known Wentz skeptic, or is it like
you could say hater.
What would you say?
You can say hater because
okay. I was trying to be more.
No,
like,
I understand.
There's a rationale. There's more of a rationale to it
Yeah.
than just a guttural sort of hatred. But go ahead.
There's a difference between my skepticism of Wentz, which I think is rational, and the bit that I run on Twitter.
Right. Yeah, you gotta have bits. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I grew up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Wentz went to NDSU, which is in Fargo, North Dakota. UND and NDSU. So UND is in Grand Forks. UND and NDSU are theoretically rivals. They have not been football rivals in a long time. I think NDSU has maybe run away with it. Although the Nickel Trophy still stays in Grand Forks.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but
don't worry about it. But I decided that I hate NDSU and I hate all NDSU quarterbacks. So I decided to hate Wentz, and I thought it'd be fun to just kind of, have a bit about, a quarterback that clearly everyone seemed to be in love with.
Oh, so this wasn't like a draft evaluation.
Well, there was a draft evaluation where I did.
Because that happens a lot.
Like
draft evaluation to hatred is pretty common in this.
Oh yeah, no, it was
least.
definitely the other way around. But as I put on like an objective hat, and I was like, well, I should figure out if this guy, seems to be a good prospect. There were things that I was skeptical about, and who knows, which way or how much my biases impacted my evaluation, but. I had a lot of issues with Wentz. I thought that, for example, his tendency to invite pressure in college was something that was just not going to go away. And to his credit, in 2017, he got rid of the ball a lot faster, and he was able to manage that pocket and manipulate the pocket a lot better. But as we know, play under pressure is not stable. And so we kind of saw that kind of disappear, along with, potentially injuries impacting the way that he throws the ball and stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm probably right on Wentz. I think that there is a high probability that I'll end up being right. There is a potential opportunity where, if Doug Peterson gets fired, or even if he doesn't get fired, that they're going to give him another chance in 2021, and whatever issues that have impacted him, which could, again, be injury related, go away, right? But certainly he seems to be managing the pocket even worse than he did in college. He seems to be inviting pressure a lot more. And the thing is, play under pressure is unstable, but whether or not you invite pressure tends to be stable, unless I guess you're Ben Roethlisberger. That is one of the only exceptions. But like quarterbacks that hold on to the ball tend to stay holding on to the ball.
Yeah. I mean, my theory for the instability of play under pressure is that it's kind of like clean pocket versus a pressure rep. So it's like
clean pockets look.
It's like was it who's it Tolstoy, where it was like every happy family is the same, and every every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It's the same sort of thing. Like every clean pocket is kind of the same, and then every pressure is different. Sometimes it's a guy right in your face about to knock you down. Sometimes it's you roll to your left and you have a good throw and it's not a big problem. So I do think there's something with Wentz where he invites like bad pressure, like extremely difficult to be successful pressure. And now I was someone who was on that haterade when it came to Wentz also, mostly because I was way too emotionally invested in the success of the Browns and Sashi Brown and what they were doing there, and they passed on him. Right. So then 2017 was
there
dark.
Must have been a reason.
2017 was really dark. I can specifically remember, I don't know if it was a Monday Night Football game against what, at the time, the Redskins, now Washington football team, where he was making some just ridiculous plays. Like four guys would jump on him and then he'd just emerge out and then throw it down the field. And I was like, oh my, I can't take this anymore. This is insanity. But those are the types of plays where now like everything has to go right for it to go right, and he was just rolling, sevens over and over again and getting it every single time. And now that seems to be more difficult now. So it's a play style change, but also he's just he's not getting as lucky, I feel like.
I think that's part of it. And I think also at the beginning of his 2017 campaign, one thing that bothered me, because Eagles fans kept on, tweeting stuff at me, which,
yes,
fair enough. I mean, I put it out there, right? That
yeah.
I think Wentz is going to fail, and I think he's bad. And I think his rookie year actually provided a lot of signal that he would not succeed. I thought his rookie year looked a lot.
It was bad. It was bad. Other than the people that said that. I remember there was a quote.
If it wasn't for Jared Goff's historically bad rookie year.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, everyone thought he was good or something his rookie year. You get these anonymous quotes of, my favorite was, he's Peyton Manning before the snap and
Aaron Rodgers
after Aaron Rodgers, something like that.
I was just like, he's the best quarterback of all time, huh?
But anyway, so go ahead.
Some of the stuff I saw early from Eagles fans tweeting at me, I mean, there was a play where I forget which receiver it was. He throws it left deep downfield, and it hits the defensive back in the helmet, right? Just an objectively bad throw, bounces off the helmet and into the hands of like whatever it was, like Alshon. I mean, it was a touchdown, and goes down, and the play is like a 70-yard touchdown, and people are like, Wentz threw a 70-yard touchdown. And I was like, are you kidding me? This cannot possibly be used as evidence as that Wentz is good. And then as he goes on, he has these plays that look a lot more like talent than luck. Like you said, against Washington, just kind of emerging unscathed from a pile of 4 players and firing a dart and stuff like that. But there was stuff where Wentz's natural ability kind of helped him out a lot as well. And so you could easily kind of project that going forward as somebody that was playing well in a way that you could kind of rely on. There were questions, of course, when he went down. Foles plays and lights up the best or second best defense in the league in Minnesota. That is maybe a question about kind of whether or not that's an offensive design thing or a quarterback thing. But the Eagles didn't seem to think so, because they gave Foles a huge contract as well. So I don't know what to do with that, but it very much seems like both are bad quarterbacks now. And I'm probably going to end up being right on Wentz, but I think he's going to get another year either in Philadelphia with a new coach, in Philadelphia with the same coach, or somewhere else. I mean, there seems to be trade possibilities brewing for him.
Now, the other quarterback is Jalen Hurts now. I was probably higher than most on him coming out.
I mean, the numbers were good, right?
The numbers were good. I mean, he had this. It's funny because I specifically pointed to Russell Wilson. Not that he is Russell Wilson, but it was a similar late breakout, right? It was like you change systems. You have this late breakout situation. You have, like, I feel like you have to get in the 4.5s to really have this functional speed. It's one of those things where people compare. Like, people say Wentz is an athletic quarterback. He is, but it's just because he's like fast and really big at the same time, which are good. It's good in a Josh Allen way, where you're running, quarterback sweeps and you're piling
there's a ton of
people.
Like huge athletes that run 4.6, right? There's Allen, there's Newton, there's Luck, there's Wentz, right?
But even Russell Wilson, he runs in the 4.5s. I think he's not like a 4.4s sort of guy. Right. Like, you just have to have this threshold of being able. So I got some of those vibes from him, but. Now the question is, people are pretty down on that pick, obviously. Now, I assume that you were for the move to Hurts. After what we saw last week, does it change your opinion that much about Hurts going forward? Should it change your opinion that much about Hurts going forward? Because when I was watching the game, we talked about Wentz a lot. And again, it's hard to get Wentz out of your head to compare them, because there would be plays where pressure would come up the middle and immediately he's bailing. And, maybe he throws the ball away, maybe gains 3 yards. And for me, I'm like, wow, that was amazing. Just because if it was Carson Wentz, like, he would have somehow tried to, like, shove the guy off and 4 guys
take, like, a 15-yard sack,
and still try to throw the ball. So, I don't know if we have this, like, Wentz derangement syndrome when it comes to evaluating Hurts and how he did on Sunday.
Yeah, so I was worried about this, right? And so I started my rewatch of the game right at when Hurts came in, so that it didn't have this baseline. And I do think it says something that the offense became a lot more effective when Hurts was in. But I don't think Hurts played particularly well, honestly. When his PFF grade came out, it was like in the 40s as a passer.
Yeah,
That
it was low. Although I
yeah,
do, I mean,
it was lower than I would have
in
expected.
fairness, the PFF grade, it's not. I mean, it's not like a CPOE type of like completion percentage over expected, but I think
Right.
it's closer to that. It's like it's basically grading the throws more than it's grading some of these decisions, like we mentioned, of bailing early. I mean, he didn't take a sack, right? So you don't get credit. You don't get credit for avoiding sacks. You actually don't even get that much of a downside for taking sacks sometimes in our grading, but that's another subject. But anyway, so yeah, he did not grade well as far as on a throw by throw sort of basis.
Yeah, I was surprised at that. I wouldn't have, if I were to pick a number, I wouldn't have picked in the 40s or anything like that. But I don't think that he was a particularly good passer or anything like that. He was a pretty remarkable runner. I don't know how much of that is. I mean, when you see backup quarterbacks go in and they're significantly better athletes than their counterparts, and I've seen this a lot with Joe Webb, replacing Christian Ponder. The defense just takes a while to adjust. It even like so often I've seen it that it makes me think well, what if you just did it? It didn't have to be injury related.
Yeah.
And it seems like, offenses are experimenting with a little more, but not in a way that leads to any, real commitment. But, what if you just did it? Because it seems like when a better athlete comes in, defenses it takes like at least a quarter, if not never, to adjust to the fact that they're a running threat. So I don't know how much of that is related to that, but I think Ted Wynn just wrote a pretty good piece about kind of the offense that was there for Hurts and the way that they designed those runs and stuff like that. I mean, he also wrote a piece on the Baltimore Ravens running design too. So maybe I'm just kind of confusing everything together, but I thought they called a pretty decent game given, his running threat. I thought that some of his running threat is obviously spontaneous, but I don't know that the Miles Sanders touchdown, for example, happens without the threat of Jalen Hurts. So
that's always a question with running quarterbacks, right? Is how much do they open it up for the running game?
And the evidence seems to suggest that they do, right? But how much, right? Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it was one of, they had the next gen. Well, it was based upon this competition that they had for the big data bowl. Someone came up with the rushing yards,
the rushing yards
expectation, over expected. So the expected number is based upon the modeling that they had done. And if you see, there's this weird thing with the Ravens running backs where their expected number is very high and their over expected number is high, which means there might not there's probably something that's not being captured about Lamar Jackson, even in the over-expected number. It's not an accident that Mark Ingram is not only but I thought the baseline was really interesting for those running backs because it was well into the fives was even the expected number for running backs where you weren't seeing that for Derrick Henry and others.
Yeah, and that is a metric I'm very interested in because it was last year all the 49ers backs were at the top and that seems to imply it probably has a lot to do with play design. But then Derrick Henry is like dominating and you're like, well, I don't know if play design has much to do with what Derrick Henry is doing. Yeah. But I mean, like this year Nick Chubb I think Nick Chubb was rushing yards over expected total. He was the leader even while he was injured. That is like fascinating to me as well. So, I mean, as an aside, that metric is just, I'm endlessly interested in it. And because of the way that the design of these models works, I'm not going to ever know kind of what all the inputs are, but, I mean, well, it'll be interesting to kind of see how the evolution of that model might evolve to take into account whether or not quarterbacks are expected to be runners or whether or not the play design makes it look like the quarterback's expected to be a runner, which is a soft signal that they are. But I mean, that for, in the case of Jalen Hurts, provides you with a floor again, that gives you offensive output and offensive potential. And I think the big thing with Wentz versus Hurts is Wentz is not getting you those positive plays. But he's certainly getting you negative plays, and Hurts is avoiding those negative plays. So whether or not he's getting you those positive plays seems to be, I'm not going to say irrelevant, but seems to be less of a consideration given kind of the alternative. The discussion surrounding Wentz and what a lot of people would call excuses, I think is totally fair. That offensive line is bad. His receiving core is really bad. That has nothing to do with kind of how good of a quarterback he is. And his numbers look worse than they should based off of the talent of play that he's putting together, but he's not a good quarterback. And you can see that when Hurts goes in and does not throw particularly well and still ends up with much better throwing production. The
surrounding stuff is interesting. I do think there are some issues at receiver. I do think some other issues, but it's not the good old days where you would say the Eagles have a top 3 offensive line and their fans would get mad at you because somehow it implied something about Carson Wentz. I think like it was the rationale. It was like, no, they're not good. It's like, isn't this your team we're talking about? They're not that good.
So
Is your team's?
Let's go through them one by one. Do you think Lane Johnson is bad? Do you think Jason Kelsey is bad? What about Jason Peters? Let's talk about these guys.
Yeah, you're signing them all to record-breaking contracts. So I hope they're I hope they're good for your sake at that point. But yeah. So do you think there's any chance that you could be confident in Hurts next season as a starter if he plays well enough for the rest of the season, or is it like mid-second round pick? It's almost impossible to do that.
It would take a lot to convince me. It would take a lot. Even Mahomes week 17 when he played instead of Alex Smith, I mean, that was a really great game. And I was still like, I've got no idea who this guy is, right? Obviously, a 3-game sample is better than a 1-game sample, and a 3-game sample that seems to matter. I don't really know what's going on in the NFC East race, but it seems to matter, is going to be more impactful. But I mean, it would take a lot. It would take at least 2 legitimately high-level passing games for me. And again, I think that's a little bit further away for him, for me to consider that as a potential controversy. I think if the Eagles stuck with Wentz, I think that is a defensible decision because your ceiling seems to be higher with him based off of what we know from the 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah. I agree there. Although, as we mentioned, the third down stuff we're going to need, that was part of that part of that ceiling. So
when Stephen Ruiz wrote that article saying that Wentz was overrated in 2017 because of his third down stuff, I mean, people got so mad. They're like, "Oh, he's good because he's good." You nailed it. And he's like, that's not really
I love Steve. I feel like he writes about like the same 15 players always in one direction. So he's like, like this week he's like, Cam Newton, gotta get that. Cam Newton's better than
he's written a couple of Cam Newton articles. Yeah, for sure.
Deshaun Watson every year. It's like, let me tell you why Deshaun Watson is great. But no, but he's right about those guys. So I'll give him credit there. All right, so let's just go ahead and pivot now to. Let's go Vikings here. Let's go ahead and jump in here because we spent a decent amount of time on these other topics. So I just want to look at this kind of from a high level perspective. Now, tell me, so like I said, the conceit here I was going to say is you are now whatever title they make up for these people, president of football operations, head guru, whatever. You're the dictator. Let's say.
I'm super god, but not owner.
Yeah, super god, but not owner, and the owner is disinterested, so you don't even have to check with the owner about these decisions.
He's writing checks. That's all I need.
He's writing checks, just hanging out in the box, doing something else during the games, and so you're above Spielman, you're above Zimmer. I'm not sure where the hierarchy is there, quite honestly. So you have to decide what you're doing with this team going forward, and let me just briefly just say what I think about the team, and then I'll turn it over to you. So the things that jumped out to me was when I was looking at like success rate type metrics, whether it's defensively, offensively, it wasn't a big difference, honestly, year over year. Now, defensively, you're not getting pressure, so that's a difference, and maybe that was part of the reason why, from an EPA per play perspective, it's gotten a lot worse on defense, is because you weren't creating that pressure. But it seems offensively and defensively, a lot of it you could just throw in and say it's a turnover difference. Because I looked up some numbers on Pro Football Reference, and it was this year about 15% of their drives are ending in turnovers. On the offense, it was only 10% last year. On defense, 10% of drives are ending in turnovers for their opponent. It was 17% last year, so it was really, really high last year. So that alone, I feel like can explain a lot of it. And I feel like this is a team that can compete, is better than their record, is better probably than teams like the Arizona Cardinals, who were in the mix to potentially make the playoffs. But if they don't make the playoffs, and like I said, you're now the guru in charge, I don't know if you can run it back still, because of the fact that it's been the nature of this team that it will just progressively get worse because of the contract situations and the feed of talent, which is now helping with Justin Jefferson a little bit on that end, but not necessarily everywhere. So anyway, so that's my high level, is that maybe they're not that different year over year. What do you think about that take?
Yeah, I would say that there's something to that, but I think that there is a pretty substantial difference on defense that's worth kind of mentioning, because I think some of the stuff, like I think, for example, the way that we talk about turnovers is a little bit kind of screwy, because I think that turnover regression really only makes a ton of sense at the extremes, because I think good defenses that prevent yardage are also defenses that tend to create turnovers. And there is some stickiness to turnovers. And I think you see that a lot more with above average turnover rate defenses than you do with extremely good turnover defenses. And so the problem with the Vikings is that they've had to adjust their scheme because of the change in the defensive talent. And so last week they played 9 starters on defense that they did not have starting at the beginning on their depth chart as starters in August or in 2018. And so the fact that the defense is performing as well as it is, which is obviously not up to the standards that you typically expect in Minnesota, I think is a credit to defensive design and Mike Zimmer, because the talent on that defense is substantially worse. Some of that is due to temporary injury, like Eric Kendricks. Some of that's due to long-term injury, like Daniil Hunter and Anthony Barr. And some of that is due to like free agency attrition. So, for example, Xavier Rhodes, who's playing out of his mind in Indianapolis.
He had one foot in the grave and came back out. It's like that Undertaker meme where the coffin opens
exactly,
up and he's back again.
Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, for example, they all left, and Waynes obviously is injured and Alexander's playing all right. It's an entirely new set of defenders aside from the 2 safeties, which seems like a pretty substantial change. And so I would say that Zimmer's making the defense punch above its weight, whereas last year the defense was punching below its weight until I think a certain point in time when they changed from cover 3 to cover 4, and there seems to be kind of a change, and that can be splits happen and I'm inventing a narrative, but it seems like the Vikings played a lot more cover 4 using SIS data that aligns with the increase in defensive performance in the second half of the year. So there's something there, right? And they can't do that anymore. They can't play cover 4 because they don't have the horses to. So they're playing a lot of cover 2, which a lot of people think is kind of a solved defense, which it's not, because there aren't any solved defenses, but quarterbacks are
a little bit of a renaissance, though, I'm hearing. It
is. And again, I don't think there are really solved defenses, but quarterbacks are comfortable attacking cover 2, especially given how there seem to be stronger arms in the NFL now. And that gives you those corner routes that sometimes are pretty good there. There's a lot here and there, but I think, the lack of pressure, I think the lack of, and linebacker plays typically does not correlate very strongly with overall defensive play. I think the way that they used to design that scheme made it seem a little stronger for them. I think that some of the stuff that they're good at year to year, for example, they seem to be with the only defense in the world that is good at red zone at year after year after year after year.
Right.
It seems to be a design thing. And they seem to be consistently good at third down stuff. There's something there in the coaching that makes that happen. But I think for the most part, all the stuff outside of that just makes them, it's so difficult for them to be able to consistently play defensively. So I think that there is an issue there. I think a lot of that is going to be maturation, but if I'm super god that, gets, the checkbook, I think that we're pot committed to Kirk Cousins. I would normally want to take advantage of the draft class and the pick that you've got to trade everything for a quarterback, but I'm not going to see returns on that for like 3 years because of the way that Cousins contract is structured. So I may not be able to do that. I might trade for future picks, actually. I think that's one of the things I want to do is I want to trade for future picks because of the crazy discount that you get on future picks. And I'm not going to be as pot committed to Cousins in the future. So I think that that's one thing I want to do, which obviously raises a serious question about what you're going to do this year. I think you have to cut the Anthony Barr contract. I think that you do that in order to retain Anthony Harris, who's going to be a free agent. And I think that safety is more important than linebacker. So that's something, and you've generated a lot of potential value in the fact that those corners seem to actually be turning out to be pretty good on rookie contracts. So there's something there. But yeah, my investments in the draft after I trade some future picks away will probably be some low cost linebackers to just replace Anthony Barr and just to have somebody who can stop the run. and also take advantage of the fact that the defensive line coach seems to be preternaturally good at identifying defensive line talent year after year and invest a couple more picks along the defensive line wherever that talent may appear, whether it's defensive tackle or defensive end. And that's probably where I'm going to be. And then Vikings fans are going to be mad that they didn't focus exclusively on the offensive line. But I think that that's something that you still want to do. But I think that it's so easy to overrate the importance of the offensive line because you only see the negative plays typically, unless you've got a top 3 offensive line like the Packers, the Browns, or sometimes the Bucs. So there's going to be some draft investment in the offensive line if I'm super god, but a lot of it's going to be on that defense because I think, like you pointed out, the offensive success rate is actually pretty good.
Yeah. I think, I mean, maybe this is too hot, but I think there's an argument to be made that the offense is better this year than it was last year. I mean, I know you had a lot of explosive plays last year, more explosive plays, more deep passes at least last year, but I don't know if that's necessarily sticky. That's the stickiest thing going forward. They've been running the ball better for what that's worth this season. I think Justin Jefferson versus Stephon Diggs. Now, this may seem hot, but
this is interesting.
I mean, he could be better, right? I mean, he could definitely be a better player.
I think that's a conversation worth having, and that is the most interesting thing in the world to me. Right?
I mean, despite the fact that everyone's opinion
of
Diggs has gone up, right? Despite the fact that everyone's opinion of Diggs has gone up, there still is something about Jefferson. It's interesting when you see these guys in the NFL versus in college. He plays a lot more physical and bigger than I thought, or than he measures, or than all these sorts of things.
Oh, yeah.
He's 6'1",
so
right?
Strong. Yeah, he's like 6'1".
He seems like a 6'3". He looks 6'3". He's 6'3". I see him as 6'3". I don't know. Like there are some of those guys who are like that, right? Who just don't seem like that guy. So he looks like he could be off the charts good sort of situation where I think that opens up things somewhat offensively, even versus someone like Diggs. Not that Diggs couldn't do that, but they were using him more. He was being used probably more down the field than at least that's where he was having his big impact. So I guess that's the reason that I would be okay ignoring the offense, and also the fact that they've invested, a second round pick in Ezra Cleveland last year, and then Garrett Bradbury the year before. So they've been investing a second round pick in a tackle a few years before that didn't end up so great. So they've been investing on that side of the ball. So I agree there. So you mentioned cutting some guys. Let's look a little bit higher from the roster. So you have the authority now to say what you said makes me think that you would want to retain Zimmer because of the fact that he's the straw that stirs the defensive drink, and he's going to be the guy who's going to figure all these things out no matter who you're putting those guys in there. Spielman since you're becoming de facto GM with these decisions, does it even matter when it comes to someone like him? Because I have trouble figuring out whether some of these GMs are good or not. The only thing I'll say for him is maybe press it a little bit too far with running it back and continuing with the contracts rather than trying to figure out more outs and more optionality that he didn't really build in much.
Yeah, I think the stuff where Spielman shines is during the draft, not necessarily in talent evaluation, because it's tough to figure out if a GM is any good at that given the general randomness of that, but in generally doing a pretty good job of figuring out value, tending to come away with a lot more value than other GMs in trades, trading a lot, trading down a lot, figuring out the fact that it makes a lot more sense to have a ton of picks, stuff like that. I think that he's pretty good at acquiring talent in the draft. I think that his free agency record, I think, is something that Vikings fans criticize, but I think league-wide is about average. Which is valuable enough to me. And I think that some of the stuff that's worth criticizing, I am not confident that he is 100% responsible for. Like, I don't think that he would have paid out that Anthony Barr contract, for example. I think that is 100% a Zimmer creation.
Then is Zimmer more of a problem than I would have suspected because of things like that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things Zimmer's bad at, but those things are easy to identify, right? This goes back to that earlier thing about how coaches that how again it's easy to identify some aspects of coaching that might matter a lot less. And obviously cap management's important, but I think that only expresses itself in a couple of situations, right? I think, for example, Zimmer might have wanted to keep Xavier Rhodes, and Spielman was like, not on your life. And while that would have turned out to maybe be a good decision, I don't know. I think for the most part, there is a lot of assertiveness that Spielman can make, but there are just some situations, for example, where, Spielman might think, I don't know if I want to spend that much on a nose tackle, and Zimmer says we have to, and then they spend a lot on the nose tackle, right?
Yeah.
And I think according to PFF WAR, actually Vikings nose tackles when they play well actually do have wins above replacement, which is not very typical. So there's something there, right? But I would say that the stuff that Zimmer's bad at is easy to identify, and it's very frustrating. He is just awful at game management, the pressure he puts on offensive coordinators to run the ball. That stuff's not very good. He's also a 600 coach, and those are tough to find. Like 7 active coaches that have a higher win percentage than him, and one of them is Mike McCarthy, so it's fake. I so
wow, shots fired.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many.
Well, give it another season. Give it another season.
Oh yeah, sure. But I would say that it's hard to find a top 6 coach. So and also one of them is Doug Peterson, and he's on the verge of potentially being fired, right? And so I would say that it took Andy Reid like 20 years to win a Super Bowl, right? Obviously he got there where the Vikings didn't, but do 2 NFC championship appearances not count either? Like I think that he is a good coach at the stuff that is so hard to find and all that managerial stuff. And interpersonally, he might not be a great coach. He probably doesn't develop the kind of collaborative atmosphere that we talked about, but whatever it is, it expresses itself in wins. And so I would say that, the only situation where I get rid of Zimmer is where you start hitting an age curve, right? An age problem, or you're absolutely blowing it up and you're comfortable maybe cycling through a few coaches and a few quarterbacks. And I don't think the Vikings are there yet. And I think it'd be difficult for them to be given Cousins' contract.
Okay. So when it comes, this reminds me of this. I'm assuming you saw the Stephon Diggs interview where he doesn't say who. We don't know if he's talking about Spielman. We don't know if he's talking about Zimmer. I assume they'll be the two potential people.
He could be talking about Stefanski. You got to watch out.
Could be talking about Stefanski. That's a good point. Although I think it's a little bit above right, his pay grade. And plus, this is a contract from a couple of years ago, right? Like when did he sign it? Was it before Stefanski was OC?
It was before, but I think the understanding is that Stefanski would become the OC when he signed it.
Okay. Anyway, but details. But for those of you who didn't read it, it was nice, good red meat for our nerds.
It was take propaganda. That's what it was.
Take propaganda for nerds. So of course Ben Baldwin was on it immediately. He has another bot which searches for anything that says don't run the ball and immediately
right, yeah.
tweets it out. So Diggs said that he felt like he was deceived, I guess is maybe the right word.
Right. Misled, maybe is the softest way to put it.
Yeah, softest way about the direction. Well, not the direction of the office, but his usage. He just said his usage, so we don't know what that means necessarily. And then obviously we know that they were very run heavy, that he was not being targeted a whole lot. He was productive because he was super efficient, but there were stretches that he was not getting the ball and he was complaining and those sorts of things. So when it comes to that, is that a concern about the Zimmer-Spielman regime? Is this a Stephon Diggs issue? Maybe would have happened otherwise. Because when it comes to someone like Kirk Cousins, I could see him being a great match for Zimmer because he'll just take it, right? He'll take it and he'll be constructive. Like I don't think he's gonna mope. He's not a moper, right? He's not a moper. Yeah. He's a grinder, right? He's like I'm gonna get better all the time, and I think that probably works with Zimmer. But maybe Zimmer doesn't work great with certain players, and Diggs may be one of them. Maybe if they bring in a new quarterback and he's just laying into him all the time, maybe that won't work well also. So is there any worry about these soft skills that people probably don't focus on at all, or is there any value in just not having a grump as a head coach also?
What's interesting is that when Zimmer was hired in Minnesota, the outpouring that you got from former and current Cincinnati players that were coached under him was extraordinary. Not something I typically saw when coordinators got hired to become head coaches, and the testimonials were just out of control. And that is kind of an interesting contrast with, the fact that obviously with Diggs it didn't work out. I think that there was a moment where the Vikings cornerbacks did not respect his defensive call and changed the call and decided to do something else. People were questioning whether or not he lost the locker room and so on and so forth. I would say that there is some chance that he'll lose that he can lose the locker room. I think that chance is overstated, but I think that it's a risk. I mean, there's a lot that's said about like, if some of the articles that were talking about this Diggs thing, we're also talking about how like Terrence Newman and Chad Greenway were like, this new generation of players, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I don't think that's
millennials.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think
all
that's
millennials now. They're
right.
all millennials now that I think about it. I'm getting so old. I can't even say millennials anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's they're Zoomers now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't really think that that's a big concern or anything like that. So I think that for the most part he can connect with players. I think that I don't think that this is a negative for Diggs, but I think it was somewhat unique to Diggs, if I'll say that. I think that Diggs has a point that he was right, and that's fine. And that he wants to be with a franchise that wants him. And for him, that definition means using him in ways that, or just even using him, right? And the contract is part of that, but also usage is part of that. And I think that that's like a totally normal human thing to want. And so sometimes that's just not going to cohere with the team goal. And I don't think that makes Diggs a worse person or a worse teammate or anything like that. So I think that that's an issue, right? And I think that having to deal with that kind of change in relationships is something that's difficult to manage. But I don't think that this is endemic to Mike Zimmer. And I think that there's a lot of evidence that he attracts players too. For example, when Anthony Barr flipped on the Jets, like I don't think that happens unless he has a strong relationship with Mike Zimmer.
Right. Okay, so when we've talked about Cousins, maybe we'll go back to Cousins. Maybe I'll just give you this. This is a question that we can say for Cousins for everyone is you're wedded to him was basically what you said about him.
Yeah.
Which is, it's like
that's
my
situation.
wife. It's like my wife or something, right? It's like you're not exactly thrilled to say anything here.
I have no complaints about my wife.
Yeah, exactly. So, but better yet, this sounds like a silly question, but is Kirk Cousins good? Like, is he good? Because there are some people who are going to say, point at these numbers. They're going to point at these fancy schmancy, numbers, and they're going to say he's good. There are other people that will swear on their lives that he is not good or isn't going to elevate the passing game and they're just annoyed to no end by things that he can do in the way that he plays. And they may even want someone who's not as good, who would just kind of play in a different style or with a different aggression. I'm not sure exactly what it is. So is he good?
I think it's a fair question because it is very difficult to find good quarterbacks with a career as long as his that have a 500 record. Obviously, quarterback
wins. We're having a QB wins.
Well, quarterback wins are not a great stat, but quarterbacks
long enough timeline, though. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. They have such a strong influence on wins that on a long timeline, good quarterbacks tend to express themselves in at least a winning record, right? Like I think the leader in quarterback win rate is Darryl LaMonica, and nobody would argue that he's the best quarterback of all time. So there's something there to be said about how quarterback wins are not kind of universal in distinguishing between good quarterbacks. But it's tough. But I mean, we've seen, for example, Deshaun Watson, everybody agrees is a good quarterback, and look what's happening, right? So it's possible. One would also argue that Cousins has had a better situation than most, given the nature of the defenses that he's worked with in Minnesota, the supporting cast he's had in Washington and Minnesota, at least from a skill player perspective. And I would say that the offensive line situation in Minnesota is easy to overstate from the perspective of Minnesota. It's not a great offensive line situation, but neither is it unique among quarterbacks that have performed well. That said, I think that he is probably a good quarterback, and I hate hedging on a quarterback that's like 8 years into a career or anything like that. It also took me a while for me to recognize that Matt Stafford was a good quarterback. I'll say that. But yeah, I think that I
still might not be there yet, but it's only because people think people are like, I'm being contrarian on that one. I remember going into this year, he did his normal thing.
Your organization's great of him after Patricia left.
Yeah. Stafford did his normal thing where he put up a decent season, and then everyone vaulted him up into like the top 6 quarterbacks, and then fell on his face. So yeah,
that's the 8-game sample. Yeah. But you would argue that he was a good though, right? Like,
maybe
he wasn't
good,
the top
definitely.
6 quarterback. Yeah. if you lined up the best 30, if you were given a list of 32 quarterbacks and you were given 100% confidence that these are the best 32 quarterbacks on the planet, college, NFL, doesn't matter, right? And you knew looking at the list that these are the best 32 quarterbacks in the NFL at the moment, right? First, it'd be interesting to see if Wentz was on that list. But second,
Another shot.
that Kirk Cousins
couldn't help yourself.
Right? I couldn't. That Kirk Cousins would be on the list, and you don't know how that list is ordered, right? And so you're now given the challenge of ordering the quarterbacks. You probably put Kirk Cousins in that top 16, right? I can't imagine that you wouldn't.
Oh, well, how about this? Let me reframe this. So let's forget the fact of what his contract actually is, and let's say that I believe he has a $21 million cap hit this season. It goes up to 31 next season, then it goes to 45 the season after that. So let's say these were team options going forward. Okay, do you bring him back at 31? Do you really think I need to get aggressive and trade up and get a quarterback? Although I feel like that's a dangerous thought exercise, because just listening to talk around the NFL, it seems like there are always 20 teams who are supposedly going to trade up for one of these three quarterbacks, and it never, the numbers just don't work.
Right.
Are you comfortable bringing him back at 31? Do you think maybe I'll let him go? And there are all these options floating around, right? I mean, none of them are that attractive, right? But would you prefer one of those at a lower cap number?
If these are magically options now.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Magic option years. Yeah. Because let's not just say I'm married and I can't afford to get a divorce. Let's say you could get out. Okay.
Right. One, they're options. Two, it's a normal cap year next year, I think, is part of this conversation.
Okay. We'll say that. We'll say that too. And there's some chance that that's actually is fairly normal if they bump it up to 195 or whatever.
And I retain super god powers over the rest of the roster. If we've got these three things.
Yes.
I would decline the option because the roster is blow upable, I think. It is very blow upable outside of the Cousins thing. I can trade Rudolph. I've got, some great talent on rookie contracts. Kendricks is very tradable. I can cut Barr. I can, there's a bunch of stuff. Anthony Harris has to walk, regrettably. I can trade Harrison Smith. It's so blow upable. But without
you mentioned the offense is kind of there, right? So the offense, like
it is,
you'd want to have a functional quarterback,
in,
right?
A lot of that is, you got Dalvin Cook guaranteed, you've got Adam Thielen guaranteed, you've got Justin Jefferson rookie contract. Everybody but Riley Reif essentially is you're committed, right? And you're fine with that commitment, except for maybe Dalvin Cook.
So you have the potential maybe to waste a year or to waste 2 years of these players if you don't get the quarterback. If you try something at quarterback and it's not as good as Cousins, right? You miss, which is the possibility. No matter what you do, that's a possibility.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. If Zach Wilson is not like good, right, which is certainly a possibility, right, or whoever you're trading up for. Yeah.
And you might not find that out you have to give him at least 2 years, right?
Yeah. You give him 2 years, and then you have to make a tough decision, and you get.
Well, now that Josh Allen hit, everyone has to have 3.
Yeah, and everyone gets 3 years now. Yeah. Jared Goff was good in 2, Carson Wentz was good and then not good in 2, but Josh Allen was good in 3, so now everybody gets 3.
That's the new minimum.
Yeah. Zach Wilson, gets 2 years or whoever it is. And now I'm facing another roster decision in 2 years. I'm comfortable with that for sure. But I don't think that is a problem with Cousins. I think it's an issue with Vikings team construction. I think that the Vikings contracts are mismanaged in ways that don't represent positional value very well. I think that it is very difficult to get better with the age of the players that they have. And I think that it's better to gamble on, let's say 50-50 odds of Super Bowl relevancy for 10 years than, the 60% odds of Super Bowl relevancy for like 1 year, I think is kind of the way that you're looking at it. I think that Cousins is worth $31 million in a vacuum. So that's the other part of that.
Do you think he would get $31 million from someplace else?
On an open market? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Again, in a normal cap year. Yeah. Like, for example, if I don't know how sheddable Jimmy Garoppolo's contract is, but I bet Kyle Shanahan
would. It's very sheddable.
Yeah. Well, then there you go. I think that Kyle Shanahan would whip up or snap up the Cousins $31 million contract. Like, in a magical world where a veteran goes through waivers, Kyle Shanahan would be like, I'm going to grab that guy. So I think that he would. And I think that rosters that seem complete but don't have a quarterback, maybe the Giants are an example. I don't know. Daniel Jones seems to have a good PFF grade, but
we'll see. We'll see about that.
But teams that don't have a quarterback, but have kind of the rest of that stuff figured out, or teams that are moving on from quarterbacks, like the Saints and the Buccaneers, for example, I think would be comfortable spending $31 million, unless Taysom Hill really is the future. I think that he would find $30 million or more in an open market in a normal cap year. So that might be a way to frame it, but I think that the particulars of the Vikings make it difficult for them to be the ones that commit to that $31 million option.
Okay, now let's pivot back to their chances for this season. I mentioned before we have about a 15% chance of making the playoffs. They have the Bears and the Cardinals to get past. They play the Bears to end the season. They've already beaten the Bears once, so that's nice for that possibility. I feel like their team could like sneaky be competitive. Could win at least one game in the playoffs. I guess anyone could win one game, maybe even win two games in the playoffs. Do you think I'm wrong? I guess I just see the NFC as a very beatable conference.
I mean, the Vikings beat the Packers, right? Like it's all there. No, I think that the Vikings could potentially make some noise in the playoffs. I wouldn't say that the betting odds would favor them or anything like that, but I think the betting odds, once the playoffs are set, I think the betting odds in the NFC are going to look surprisingly even, right? So I mean, we'll see. I mean, obviously the betting Twitter is going to know a lot more about this than I will. But
it's just going to depend on whoever has the bye is going to be big. I mean, I think the Saints are probably. I still think the Saints are the best team, but
I think it might be the Rams.
Now they're not the bye, so yeah,
it might be the Rams.
Well, maybe that's my other question. So the Rams are getting a lot of buzz this week.
Yeah,
specifically in this context of the Rams are the team that can beat the Chiefs. This seems to be a new thing. So maybe I'll ask you a couple.
That's not even how I think of it. But I mean, maybe they could.
Well, yeah. Well, this is a different thing. Well, maybe we'll just totally switch gears here. And I just want to know, because I think this is an interesting discussion, because the thought was that they somehow have the defense that can beat the Chiefs.
Is there a particular defense that can beat the Chiefs?
Yeah, that's part of the problem. Well, part of the problem was it was framed by someone who I don't remember. I'll just slander them anonymously. Was shut down.
Shut down.
You can't. Never use the word shut down. When it comes.
If I'm the Rams, I'm hiring Paul Gunther exclusively for that matchup against the Chiefs. Let's see what happens.
Okay, well, give me your Rams take. Maybe we'll end it on this, because I do think the Rams are interesting. I'm more skeptical because I don't think they're that good offensively, honestly.
I guess that's important. I think they've got the number one pass defense in the league. Okay. So I think that's part of it. I think the fact that Troy Hill is good has made that defense just remarkable, right? Troy Hill, Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Donald, plus like 3 or 4 safeties that are all above average. Like that's pretty good. I don't know who their linebackers are, like Troy Reader and some guy that had a really good game last week. I forget his name now. Both of them actually both linebackers had a really good game last week. Doesn't matter. They've got a great secondary. They've got a good enough defensive front, and obviously they've got Aaron Donald. But Michael Brockers is a good nose tackle. So I think they've got the best pass defense in the league. I think the run defense is good enough. And obviously defensive signal is about half as strong in predicting wins as offensive signal. So clearly they need to be good enough on offense, and they don't necessarily always have it. But I think that given how good that offensive line is, given how high floor that skill group is, I think that they can manufacture good offense. And the McVay has demonstrated that once his offense was solved, and I think Zimmer demonstrated a good part of that in their first matchup, he has been remarkably adaptable. And he got punked by Belichick, but I mean, like, who doesn't get punked by Belichick defensively? The fact that did they do a 45-0 on the paper? Like, what happened there?
It was like a reversal of the 3 points to 3 points.
But that's not that important because the Patriots are a weird team right now. But the fact that McVay is continuously innovating on offense and actually, pulled it over Zimmer the following year tells me that the offensive design there is probably going to be good enough to overcome the fact that Goff is like whatever. So I think offensively they're good enough for them. They're like what would you say? They're like the 8th, 9th offense? Probably not. You don't like that offense.
Yeah, I mean, they're in that range. The problem is it's skewed somewhat by the fact that they run so much, so that even a successful running team can kind of drag down some of those averages. So I mean, they're probably a little bit lower than that if you look at it as an offense as a whole. If you teased out the pieces and then you reproportioned it, it probably would be.
If they're forced into situations, right? I mean, they're probably fine. That's the thing. It's like if they're forced to grind it out, they'll grind it out. If they're forced to throw, they'll throw, and they'll be fine at it. So,
Yeah.
play to
And
play.
Goff did that against the Bucs, right? It was surprising, but he just came out and
Yeah.
who was it? The Monday Night Crew. Someone was they were just going nuts the entire time about like,
Yeah,
I can't
it was
believe they're
just
throwing it
Jared
again.
Goff.
What's going on here?
Right.
It was like aneurysms around the entire
Right.
room.
So they're
there when
like
this is
their
happening.
neutral play calling might not be great, but I bet that their situational tools are fantastic. So that's something to work with.
But McVay is just he's a fake sharp though when it comes to these fourth down decisions and other things. Like he's just, oh my God, he's so bad. He's so
That's
bad
fair.
at these.
That's fair. But I mean, like, who's good at like which team is both good at football and good at things like fourth downs? Is it just the Bills?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be the Eagles. It's the Ravens, the
Yeah,
Browns,
Ravens.
our Browns, our new
Yeah, our Browns. So is there an
champion.
NFC team?
Let me think. Who is not the Seahawks?
They got to be good at both. They got to be good at playing football and they got to be good at spreadsheets.
That is a good question. Okay, yeah, because I'm not sure about. I thought LaFleur was actually pretty good on these decisions. Now that
Yeah,
I'm
that's
thinking
fair.
about it.
Yeah, he's
You wouldn't
fine.
think so. You wouldn't think so, but
Well,
not that you wouldn't think so.
His
but he's,
pressers make you think that he wouldn't be. That's the problem. Is that he's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we got to run the ball, and you're like, well, you got a Hall of Fame quarterback. Yeah, you got to help him out by running the ball, and then they throw it a bunch, and you're fine.
Okay, well maybe this is okay. This will be the last. This will be the last question then, because I've already taken too much of your time. So, what do you think about the Rodgers Mahomes MVP debate? Because I just want to hit that really quickly. Do you have one or the other? I'm biased towards Mahomes, so I'm discounting Rodgers. But you're more, again, you're more familiar with Rodgers than I am. I probably watched Chiefs are on television a little bit more. But when I did watch Rodgers last week, he seems to have a lot of time to throw the ball, but they are passing more quickly too in that offense.
Yeah. So A, he seems to have a lot of time to throw the ball. It turns out he does. B, he is passing quickly. So it's kind of funny.
It's both of those things, right?
Yeah.
That's why his sack rate's way down. Yeah.
I would give it to Rodgers. So obviously his efficiency numbers are a little bit better than Mahomes. But the thing that swings it for me is I think the supporting cast argument, which is such a tired, difficult to have conversation. But we know that wide receivers matter more than offensive linemen. We also know that Travis Kelce might be the most valuable tight end in football. And so I would say that it is very clear that Mahomes has a more effective supporting cast in terms of helping a quarterback produce the numbers that put you in the MVP conversation. Rodgers has Devontae Adams, and I think you would probably take Devontae Adams over Tyreek Hill. That's a tough conversation to have because, who knows?
They're just different. They're just so different.
They're just so different, right? And I don't know if Tyreek Hill is as good as he is without Patrick Mahomes because he can leverage the unique talents, right? They're just this remarkable synergy, which I don't think is a knock on Mahomes. But I think that the skill talent overshadows the offensive line differential, and I think that it's not as if the defensive schedule is enough in either way to swing things for me. And I would say that Rodgers has provided more value to his team than Mahomes has this year. And then I think the thing that breaks it for me is Mahomes getting credit for dropped picks, essentially, right? Where they turn into incompletions. I think the big play turnover worthy differential for both of them, it's remarkable, but I think it's pretty high. I think it's higher for Rodgers. And I think that might be the difference there is I think from play to play, Rodgers has performed better. I think that Rodgers has a little bit less to work with. And yeah, I mean, that conversation is close enough. I don't really need to do much more.
Yeah. Okay. So the one, I think I agree with all of that. The one thing
the
one thing has popped up, which it's kind of, it's you can quantify this too, but I don't know how it feeds into people's opinion when we're talking about value, because most often we're talking about these metrics, although you weren't quoting these metrics, but we're talking about metrics like QBR or EPA per play. It's a rate stat, right? So there still is this element where we're talking about value of the Chiefs Mahomes is a bigger part of the Chiefs offense.
Yeah, and they'll throw it while up. How valuable is that?
Well, and they'll throw it while down more. I mean, they'll throw it all the time.
Right, but
I think it is valuable. But I'm just you're relying upon this player more than you would otherwise. So, you can say, Rodgers could do it.
I'll say this about the MVP race. I'll say this. I don't love the fact that it's called the most valuable player because I would love to just give it to the best player. And in fact, I have argued in the past that we should just give it to the best player and ignore the word value because that just makes it more interesting. Because
Wouldn't that just be more chaos, though? That's just like more chaos.
But that's great. We already have a best quarterback award. It's called the All-Pro QB. We just give it to that guy, right? I think we should just give it to the best player, and then we can argue over whether or not it's like Aaron Donald or whoever's second. I don't know who's second is.
Yeah, it just seems weird because in all other sports, you would. Well, I guess maybe not necessarily in baseball. It depends on how you're looking at it. But in other sports, MVP symbolizes I want this player before I want anyone else, basically. Like that is the one player, right. And that's why the kind of the value component in there. So I think we could add awards, maybe. Maybe you can add a secondary award
like
to
player of the
not
year?
Have the something like that. I could see something like that as being the solution there. But anyway, I guess I'm still hanging on to Mahomes a little bit just because I don't know. Maybe, like I said, maybe I'm biased, but there's something about when
I think you're committing a nerd sin. I think you're seduced by the highlights.
That's a possibility, but they are pretty good. And the fact that his offensive line went to dust, and it doesn't even seem to matter at all. He just backpedals even further, and then flings it to somebody.
Yeah, it is really remarkable when a quarterback commits a negative EPA decision and turns it into a positive EPA decision. But what about a quarterback who never makes that decision in the first place?
Well, it helps if you can just go like this and then not have to worry about anything. But anyway, we shall see. I think it'll be interesting to see if there's if Rodgers, if he can keep it up for the next few games. I'm more confident Mahomes can than Rodgers can, despite the easier schedule. But that'll be the question here. Anyway, so you did it all. You said it all. We went through everything Vikings related. Thanks so much, Arif, for coming on again. Arif Hasan, NFL. Follow him at The Athletic. Everyone's got to subscribe to Athletic too, because I know you're probably annoyed already if you're not subscribing that you see content that you can't click on and can't get through to. But I found it to be immensely valuable there. Anything else you want to plug before I let you go?
I've got 2 Vikings specific podcasts that I'm on. I'm told that people who aren't fans of the Vikings like listening to it, which I find fascinating. I have no idea why, but if you want to find out why, certainly subscribe to them. So you can go to Norse Code, NORSE, the Norse Code, which is the podcast I've been running since 2011, or you can go to the Football Machine, which is a podcast I do with Sam Ekstrom, and player to be named later. I guess we always have a different third host this year, and you can find both of those wherever you find podcasts, and that one's a little bit more Vikings focused because Norse Code will just talk about like food or whatever if they want to. So
yeah, well, that's probably why
that's probably why. Yeah.
Everyone wants to hear about food. That's why you listen. Anyway, go subscribe to those. Go and rate and review and subscribe here. And once again, thanks everyone for tuning in.